If you're anything like me, the word acceptance is actually an emotional trigger. I remember after my son Reggie died, I, with a lot of anger, said, I will never accept my child's death. We often teach of these 5 stages of grief that end in acceptance. The 5 stages of grief was never intended for the people left behind. And so when you think about your grief and how do you live without your loved one, I don't want you to think of it as a journey that has an ending in acceptance. My name's Dr. B. I've actually lost 3 children and my husband over the course of 20 years. So I understand grief. I understand traumatic grief. And I am living without my children and my husband, finding ways to expand and live without my loved ones. So how do you actually do that? Well, we often think, okay, we need to process, we need to think through this, we need to move through it, we need to let things go. But it's a little more complicated than that. And if you are struggling with a grief, you know that it's not as easy as that. You can't just let go, that sometimes the pain is too much. I can vividly remember each death that I have had and the weeks and months and years following those deaths and the process in which I had to go through. Reggie's was my biggest turning point in understanding grief and being able to think and organize and choose. And I talk about that a lot, but it is so important. Because when you have experienced grief and you are thinking about how do I live without my loved one, and you begin thinking about that and the pain feels unbearable. So then you try to push it aside. You say, I should not be still feeling this kind of pain. Or you're like, I can't deal with it. And then something happens or it's a holiday or an anniversary and the grief and the pain just floods you. When we learn to think, we need to learn to think efficiently, right? Oftentimes when we think about our pain, we begin to ruminate and we begin to think about the negativity around it. And I can tell you, I have sat and wallowed in my pain. The days of I can't feel this pain anymore. I can't move on. I can't be happy. The thoughts of I'm not a good mother. If I was a good mother, I would have been able to save my children. I wouldn't have let them do such and such, or I would have found a cure for the disease that they were fighting. Are you ever sitting in that? That's not efficiently thinking. That is ruminating. And what it's doing is it's creating these negative neural pathways over and over and over again. And so when you sit to think about your pain, we need to do it in a gracious, thoughtful, loving way, loving to yourself. And so I teach this thought map where we begin to see patterns in the way that we think. And mine is always, gosh, if I was better, if I was more, if I was enough, these things would not have happened to me. But that is negative dialogue. That is the default mode network that I, go back to when things get hard. But that is not healthy. And that is not honoring your loved one in the reality of living without them. So after Reggie's death, so I lost my son Johnny in a drowning accident in 2005, did not really stop and grieve because I was raising 6 other children and my son Reggie began having catastrophic epilepsy. It wasn't until Reggie's death, little over 10 years later, that the flood of reality of this kind of pain, I knew I had to figure it out. And at that point, I started talking about what I call controlled grief. So if you click on the link in the description, you'll come to a worksheet that says controlled grief. And this is learning how to sit in the pain of grief. We live in a culture where we don't want to feel pain. We have a headache, we take a pill. Things go wrong, we're trying to always fix it. Grief is different. Grief, we must feel the pain of grief. You must allow yourself permission to feel that pain. My grief of losing 3 children and my husband will be with me forever. That kind of grief changes you. And living without your loved one here is hard. And acknowledging that. But if we are thinking efficiently and we are allowing ourselves to feel the pain of grief, that grief intensity and frequency in which you have to feel the pain will decrease. But I want to talk about organization. And in the Mentally Strong Method, we have this think, organize, choose. And when you are able to organize your thoughts, grief is one of the categories in which we organize. There's so many other factors that are contributing or enmeshed with your grief that are having a negative impact. So if you sit in the pain of your grief and you're thinking negative thoughts, that's not controlled grief. You're not sitting in the pain of living without your loved one. You're confirming the negative thoughts around that. And so when I teach about organizing your thoughts, grief is a cherished pain that you get to hold as a badge of honor for the rest of your life. But the trauma associated with that, and losing a child, losing a husband, is traumatic grief. The trauma around that needs to be processed and let go. The negative thoughts around that need to be reframed. If you don't, and you sit in that pain, and you're confirming the negative thoughts, you're actually not moving forward. You're not expanding around your grief. Again, the pain of your grief is yours. You are allowed to hold that as a badge of honor. But to do that in a healthy way, you have to be able to release the trauma piece, change those negative thoughts. And a lot of people won't tell you, but I will tell you, when it comes to living without your loved one, you must address spiritual conflict. For me, that spiritual conflict was, I believe in a God that loves me and protects me. And then I lose one child, and then a second child. And then there's no way God would take a third child, right? I had to wrestle with God over what that meant and how can there really be a God that loves me and protects me? And if you're listening and you're like, well, I don't believe in a God, it's still a spiritual conflict when you're talking about living without your loved one. What is your belief system of what happens to that loved one when they leave this earth? And so processing that, it's its own category. That's not your grief. Your grief is the actual pain that they are not here on this earth anymore. The missing them, the wishing they were there. I'm about to go to a big family event in a couple days. And I feel like an emptiness around my kids not being there. But I have done this wrestling, this spiritual conflict and wrestling with God. And I know that they are there, that they are with me. And, having this understanding of what happens when they leave this earth. And so when we talk about choosing things, right? Oftentimes, people are like, choose positivity, choose gratefulness. Yes, those are super important. But they don't actually help the pain of the grief, right? The pain of the grief, you have to feel, but feel it without the trauma and the negative thoughts. Remember, there's a worksheet. Click the link below, and it talks some more about what controlled grief is and how to take that time out of your day, out of your week, to feel the pain. Because we often try to suppress it. I help a lot of people who have pretty significant grief and trauma, and they're trying to not feel the pain. And sometimes that means having a drink every day, using cannabis every day, or some sort of alteration that dulls the pain. And I have, in my mentally strong method, addiction, it's its own category, because it can happen to anyone. And I often, especially after Reggie died and then Maya died, I would not drink alone, because I had seen so many people who they would start with one glass of wine a night to be able to go to sleep, and then a second glass. And then it becomes an addiction when it was really just started as a coping mechanism. So learning to think, organize so that you can choose, right? And the choices are different. So your choices for grief are doing that controlled grief. The choice for trauma is identifying what pieces of this are trauma. I can give you an example. With my son, Reggie, he was very sick his whole life. He was multiple hospitalizations, multiple times almost dying. And his life was traumatic. I was always in fight or flight to save Reggie's life. That is the trauma associated with Reggie's death. I would not wish Reggie back to this earth when he died, because by the time Reggie passed, he was in so much pain. He wasn't living a quality of life. And so the trauma pieces around Reggie's death are 10 years of fighting. And I have been, working on letting go of that piece by piece. For my daughter Maya, much more peaceful life, same disorder, completely different presentation, much more peaceful life. But I found her in the morning, had to do CPR. The morning that happened, and all of the things around it are the trauma. And I can even share with you, as I said that, I had these little flashbacks of that morning. But I've done a lot of the work, and so I'm easily nope, nope, nope. And then I would do the nope, 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 and then I'll take time to grieve the pain of her loss, not focus on the trauma of the day that she died. Whew, I had to give myself a little breath there. So in grief, we're allowing ourselves to feel the pain of living without them. We're letting go of the trauma. Remember, you clicked on this video because how do you live without your loved one? You honor them by allowing yourself to feel the pain of the grief. But you don't let all the other things, the negative talk, the trauma, the spiritual conflict, the addiction, get enmeshed with missing your loved one, and you grow around that grief. I want you to continue watching and learning about how to process and live without your loved one. Keep watching, subscribe to the channel. If you click the link, you'll be invited to all of the free content that I have available, and even to be able to work with me.